So you guys going for a wiretap on that port case?
Uh-huh.
They got every swinging dick with a shield on that detail but me.
Jealous bitch? I'd rather be back in homicide.
Take your place in the heartbeat.
Alex Cottrell and Toby Huntingford present Caught on the Wire. This podcast is an episode-by-episode analysis of HBO's widely acclaimed TV series about the city of Baltimore, its people, and its many problems. Find more information about the show and all the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com.
Hello, welcome to Caught on the Wire. It's Toby Huntingford here. I'm joined as always by my fellow wire addict, Alex Cottrell. We're here today to analyse and review for you episode 8 of season 2, Duck and Cover. How are you doing today, Alex? Have you had a good week?
Yeah, it's been nice. We've got a slightly later recording than usual today, haven't we?
Yeah, we're really battling with the fatigue here. It's about 11:15 on a Wednesday night. It's kind of the graveyard shift almost. I've had a very late shift at work, and I'm kind of pumped a little bit still. So I'm going to kind of use that to channel it into the podcast and hopefully keep people awake in the process. So
it feels like a very different show all of a sudden, doesn't it?
Yeah, we really are kind of just the last ones up. So yeah, it's definitely a different way of doing it, and we'll see if it comes out different on the show.
We don't have any cigars or smooth jazz in the background. I wish we did. Maybe when I edit this, I'll put some in.
You know, that's the beauty of a podcast. We can always bring those things in if we want to. I'm kind of open to any creative choices you may want to choose in the editing, Alex. Always open to a bit of experimentation.
I'll hold you to that. I'm just going to throw in some crazy stuff now when you least expect it.
Okay, I'll have to keep my ears pricked when I listen. We also don't have any emails this week, which means we can kind of just jump straight into the episode, if that's what everyone's looking for. And I think looking at the time, it might be best to do that. So, Alex, I'll pass over to you for our recap this week. Did you manage to whittle it down into a suitable number of parts or a manageable number of parts?
Yeah, there's it's slightly more easily arranged this week. It's all based around sort of the detail and what's going on with the docks, and we have McNulty as well, who comes back into relevance in this episode. Yeah,
in a very big way. It's kind of a real McNulty standout episode, actually.
So Jimmy McNulty deals with the disappointment of his failed reconciliation with his wife by returning to his old drinking habits. He gets drunk and tries to drive home from the bar. When he crashes into a bridge while turning a corner, he refuses to believe he misjudged the turn, reverses back and hits it again, cutting his hand. He then gets some food at a diner and ends up having a one-night stand with the waitress. He wakes up the next morning hungover, with the cut in his hand having bled onto the floor.
Oh, what an opener.
It's quite a long opening scene as well.
It's a good 4 minutes, isn't it?
Yeah, which is unusual. Most of them are sort of one single scene based in a single place, but this cuts between a whole selection. It's a real love letter to the misdeeds of Jimmy McNulty.
Yeah, I quite like the way it's done as well with all those kind of patchy scenes. It really does feel like a half-remembered kind of booze-up weekend, almost kind of like just some kind of crazy drunken experience. And we're kind of along for the ride with him. And the disorientation of his life just really kind of spills out in a very funny way, as evil as it is to laugh at what's going on right now. And of course we get that famous, I think it's pretty infamous kind of car scene where McNulty is determined to prove to himself that he can make a basic corner when he's pretty damn drunk, and proves to everyone that he's not capable of it, which is pretty hilarious, to be honest. So, yeah, very enjoyable scene. We get a nice introduction to Jimmy's love of the Pogues as well, which I don't think have featured on the show yet, although they will feature a number of times in the future.
No, I think we've had them once before in season 1. There's a time where he's listening to the radio when they're down in that sort of sewer office. For the detail, and he's listening to the radio, listening to something on there, and it's the Pogues playing on there.
Something sounds kind of Irishy. Okay, yeah, that's true. I'll take it back. So yeah, it's we see that McNulty's love for the Pogues continues, and I think they kind of most famously crop up for the body of the body of an American, the kind of the detective's wake song that comes up a few times later on.
Yeah, it's always used at the wakes, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, that's cool. What do you think of the waitress scene? It's kind of odd, isn't it? And it seems like a very easy situation for McNulty.
Yeah, it is a little bit. It kind of rounds off the cliche in a way, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he quite obviously goes to flash that badge, doesn't he, as he leans for his wallet, which he hopes will play a big part in it. But I am left wondering what the hell happens when she goes outside and sees the state of his car. I mean, if you wouldn't run a mile at that point, when would you? Kind of. So,
yeah, that's a good point, actually.
The scene starts with a shot of his car, which then moves to the window, so he clearly drove there.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
So, yeah, very, very...
I don't know, maybe she's not picky, I guess.
Some missing pieces there, yeah.
Told her a tale, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I guess we're kind of seeing McNulty here at his absolute bottom before he begins to rise. And they're really kind of nailing this car crash moment for McNulty. So
one thing I did really like about the scene, about the car crash scene, is the way that he kind of traces his finger across towards the big pillar that he's going to obviously miss, or hoping to miss. And it kind of parodies a lot of the crime scene moments where we see characters pointing or sort of acting out parts of what they think could have happened. So there's that scene with Greg's in season 4 where she's pointing a gun trying to work out where the bullet would have gone and if it would have hit anything.
Yeah.
Oh, that's when she's like being a detective. And there's several other moments of characters like using their hands to trace movements to kind of work out exactly what would have happened, the trajectory of things. McNulty does it here as he's like pointing towards the pillar. I thought it was almost like a parody of a crime scene. Don't you think?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And he's kind of visualizing his little bullet kind of...
He's doing his detective work, even when he's in that state.
He's trying to clean up the crime scene, and this never happened right here, and then it happens again. Yeah, it just speaks to McNulty's determination and kind of ego, completely. It's a perfect scene for him, really.
He's committed to his self-destruction.
Yeah,
got to give him that.
So after a very entertaining opening, what do we delve into next with McNulty?
So continuing on, he spends another evening drinking with Bunk at the train yard. He asks about the detail and admits wanting to work with them again. He can't express his feelings but seems to want to say, without a case to work or his family, he is worthless. Yeah,
so we see McNulty has some real jealousy over the return of the wiretap, and there's clearly kind of an adult shift in the way McNulty sort of perceives his own behaviour, and really showing some regret over things he's done, particularly with Elena and perhaps with the rules as well. So it's kind of a real kind of feel like McNulty is going through a transition of somewhat and becoming maturing, which is good to see.
You get a sense that Bunk is aware that he needs to save him.
Yeah.
You can see a genuine concern from Bunk here, and obviously, as we see later on, they do end up going to Daniels. He and Freeman go to Daniels with this plea, almost, like McNulty is seriously going to drive himself somewhere even worse than he's at now.
Yeah.
And one dreads to think where he would end up if he didn't end up on this detail.
It's very true, yeah.
Might become a very different story,
Yeah, I mean, it would be pretty tragic, to be honest. I don't know why the Wire would even delve into it. It's nice that they can bring him back into a story in a relevant way. And I love the kind of summary that Bunk, expresses to Daniels about how he's kind of a drunken fuck-up, whatever happens, but, at least when he's got on the case, he has something to build towards. And It really feels like kind of a very deep understanding of McNulty. Bunk really gets him, which is good.
Yeah, that's true. It's strange because you often think of a moment like this as being like someone's second chance or their redemption or whatever, and they're rising back up. They get another opportunity to get themselves, as close to right as he's ever going to be, something like that. The Bunk says, and but it doesn't feel as optimistic as you might think, because you still know that McNulty is going to be McNulty. He's still going to go way too far and try to be a martyr and prove how smart he is. You're going to get the same shit over and over and over again. So you don't feel that kind of typical optimism about it, but it's still interesting nonetheless. But it's nice to have a main character's rise not constantly feel like a cause for great cheer all the time. It literally is just an event. Yeah,
definitely, and it's it really does feel like D'Angelo's sentiment of no second act in American lives does hang over this.
Exactly, yeah.
Exactly.
That's a good point.
What we want, and as we know from future spoilers, season 3, another dip for McNulty. Struggles and really kind of brings Greg's down with him in that season, and then season 4 he brings himself back up again. It's kind of an even and odd fluctuation, and then season 5 we go for the ultimate McNulty crash when he kind of destroys everything that he builds in season 4, as we see. I mean, we're jumping ahead, but it's nice to kind of look at the kind of wider McNulty arc and see that it really is a big sea of peaks and troughs, really, and this is kind of a big transition point in one of them.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's an important part of this podcast, I think, that we consider characters in the context of where they are when we're talking about them in relation to how they end up as a character. And McNulty is, like you say, is this peaks and troughs kind of character. So
definitely.
It's an interesting story.
Any more McNulty strands?
So the very final bit is that by the end of the episode, McNulty finds his way on the case he has worked on as part of his personal moral crusade since the beginning of the season. So that's just the fact that McNulty gets on the case, basically. Yeah.
Does that include like the chat he has with Daniels, like on the phone and stuff like that, or is that coming later?
I think that's going to be part of the Sabok detail section.
Okay.
It's covered in that bit.
Yeah.
Which is coming up next. So.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. So. I guess that's just McNulty comes back on the force, and it's nice to see him get there, as much as he perhaps doesn't deserve it. We know it's kind of his solution to life right now, and it's good to see. He really is an important part of that detail. He's a big portion of the brain power. Perhaps 90% of it is still Freeman, but he does kind of add that second real detective brain to it. So a nice bit of season 1 nostalgia, I guess, really.
Yeah, it feels detail feels a bit more complete in a way.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the next major section, which is going to be all about the actual detail itself.
Yeah.
So starting with, the detail meets with Assistant State's Attorney Rhonda Perlman, and they give her a report on their case to date. The investigation of phone logs from Gleecast Warehouse links White Mike, P.T. Dixon and Prop Joe, and Greg's photos confirm the link. They've identified Sergey and tracked his cell phone through his truck rental paperwork, and his phone records show that he calls the warehouse every day that a container goes missing. So that's kind of the first part of that, and they kind of give their recap, I suppose. I don't know if there's anything in particular you want to say about this bit.
Yeah, I just thought it was really a nice way of filling all that. I mean, it's not even exposition because we've actually seen most of these things happen. But when the detail kind of lists it in front of Rhonda, it's quite incredible how much they've really done. And this has only been in the last couple of episodes since they formed the detail properly. And they've done all sorts of street work and made all these crazy connections between different levels of street thugs and other criminals. So it's quite impressive, really, what they've managed to build, and that we've been able to watch all of it happen in front of our eyes. And now they finally have their PC for the wiretap, so we're kind of back to a wire, which is, the point of the show almost.
Speaking of the PC for the wiretap, I'll just quickly do the next section. So Daniels introduces Herc and Carver's linking of Nick Sobotka to Frog, which they have falsely reported as being obtained from an informant, namely one Fuzzy Dunlop. Perlman admits there is probable cause for wiretaps on Sergei's cell phone and the warehouse phone, and checks their efforts to prove exhaustion. Perlman checks over their paperwork and takes it to the duty judge. The judge signs off on the request, but has Herc and Carver move and install an air conditioner and wash his windows in exchange. So, like you say, they get their probable cause for the wiretap, and it's interesting that they've made quite a lot of progress very quickly since the detail has started.
Yeah.
So whereas in Season 1 there was a lot more explaining of the systems and explaining of the code, so you'd see characters explaining it to other characters, so that we, the audience, could also become accustomed with all this technology that they're using and how they're working out the information and working out the links.
Yeah.
Whereas here in Season 2 they explain it quite quickly, and we don't need to ask what all of these things are, why they need to have probable cause and everything. We've kind of been introduced to that, so it's nice that they kind of went through it, but in a more streamlined way.
Yeah, the show trusts us. It's kind of taught us things, and it's kind of the next lesson almost. And for example, when Rhonda mentions the exhaustion, there's no explanation. It's just like, what do you have for exhaustion? And anyone who's been paying attention, it makes a lot of sense, which it's good. And it really feels like it makes that environment a lot more authentic when they're not stood around kind of expositioning things for us. Which is nice.
It might have been frustrating if they'd gone through the whole process again.
Yeah. Definitely.
So it kind of assumes that you've been paying attention. The Wire is very, very good at that.
Yep, but it's also the sort of show where if you don't pay attention, then you won't get anything out of it. So it kind of works both ways. I guess the other thing we see with this scene is that the case is running very, very deep, and much deeper than Valchek's target of Sobotka. As makes sense. That's kind of the way it worked with Season 1 as well, particularly when they started following the money. There was no telling how deep the investigation would have run, and we can of course imagine that with Valchek's target gradually leaving the radar, there will be a storm coming. He seems to have been absent quite, for the last few episodes, but you can guarantee he'll be coming back and bringing a storm with him. So,
and found it quite amusing to see Herc and Carver doing the busy work for the judge.
Yeah,
and I also felt a little bit surprised to learn that was kind of, that they were being serious. That Perlman was being honest about, washing his windows and everything.
Yeah, it was. It's pretty grim, really, to be honest. Just appeasing this judge to sign off on some basic kind of telephonic surveillance, and this is his job. Like, it's just an element of his job. You don't need some kind of major inconvenience behind it.
Yeah, it's strange because it's meant to be, when you kind of think about it, it's quite shocking.
Yeah.
But the show presents it in a really kind of nonchalant style.
Yeah.
Where they're just like, yep, that's what you got to do, and then they just do it.
It's almost like they're suggesting it's kind of the standard approach to judging, or being a judge. It's like they're really suggesting it's quite a prevalent
blasé about
practice.
the whole thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Maybe it has been drawn from some sort of real life story of David Simon's or whatever, but as you say, it's interesting how it's just kind of seen as a normal practice. It's pretty morally reprehensible, really, but I guess that's what you can do with these power positions. Yeah.
I think that's about it for that section, unless you want to add any more, kind of just about the details, successes here.
Yeah. No, I think that's everything, really, yeah.
Okay, so moving on. Freeman and Bunk appeal to Daniels to help McNulty by going back to Colonel Rawls. Rawls again tells Daniels no on McNulty's transfer. Daniels then brings up his agreement to take on investigating the murders, and Rawls capitulates based on the hope that Daniels can clear his homicides. Daniels calls McNulty to let him know that he is back.
Yeah, so we get that scene that we briefly discussed when, when McNulty is policing and when he isn't policing, he's pretty much the same motherfucker, but at least, he's close to right when he's on the police force, and there was something a little bit sinister about Freeman's kind of brainwashing-esque relationship with Daniels that's developing. Daniels just says to, Freeman says to Daniels very bluntly, go back to Rules. And the next scene is just Daniels in the office with Rules, and we kind of see that Freeman's practically running the detail now, and Daniels doesn't even seem to know it. There's something quite sinister about it that I've never really caught before. I've seen the show a few times, and I think it was last week when you mentioned Freeman really being able to sway Daniels with some kind of emotional manipulation, that it kind of it really kind of hit me this week as well.
Yeah, he sort of commands a surprising amount of authority for someone who's supposed to be this house cat kind of figure, but really he's he commands a lot of respect, and it is true that he's seen. In fact, Daniels kind of suggests this later on. In season 4, I think it is, he does an impression of Freeman. He talks about, "I'm the father you never had."
Yeah,
he kind of is as if he talks to people with this sense that, I am your father. I know better than you. I'm kind of telling you in a teaching kind of way. I'm everyone's educator. And Freeman does kind of talk to people in that way. So when he looks to Daniels and is kind of just like, go back to rules, he's not really asking him or anything like that. He's literally just telling him, like you say. And as a result, because of that authority that he commands, he just seems to be able to tell Daniels what to do, and he'll do it.
Yeah. Perhaps kind of feeds into the whole seniority sucks if you ain't senior sort of thing. And he's kind of, he clearly doesn't have the rank on Daniels, but he seems to have this kind of old age, well, not old age, but this kind of wizened authority, as you say, which Daniels kind of falls victim to. Probably for the best as well, because Freeman always knows his shit.
Yeah, maybe it's sort of, like you say, him being heavily influenced and not realising it, but it's also possible that Daniels just agrees. It's the right move, so
yeah.
Daniels isn't a fool. He knows how to take the right opportunity. We've proven before, based on his decisions, that he has a want to be a moral leader to some extent.
Yeah.
And he wants to lead by example in that way, so makes sense, I think. But you are right. I think it's that kind of amount of authority that Freeman has every now and again. You don't necessarily realise it.
No, it kind of creeps up underneath, doesn't it? It's strange. Thought it was quite endearing to see how much Daniels is willing to help McNulty, kind of despite all their frictions last season. We can imagine that it's the quality of the police work that perhaps convinces Daniels, not kind of just the compassion for his broken life alone, because you sense that wouldn't be enough to really win Daniels over, perhaps. So it's kind of that combination of what McNulty can offer that really makes it work. That was my thoughts on Daniels. With regard to the rules side of that discussion, there's some interesting kind of homoerotic language going on there. He seemed to have sex on the mind. He's letting Daniels have a kiss or feel his tits or something, or he was really wishing for 3 more inches of meat. So it's kind of interesting to look at that with hindsight onto the funny gay bar scene that we see with rules later on next season.
Yeah, it is very noticeable how often he uses these kind of like homophobic slurs, or is just kind of making quite explicit sexual imagery all the time in these otherwise quite casual, albeit I guess professional conversations.
Yeah.
And when he is revealed as being gay later on, it's an odd one, isn't it? He's just overcompensating, I guess. It's not like he would ever kind of reveal that to anyone honestly. It needs to be this sort of strange bravado. Like if you over-characterize it, then it becomes so believable that you couldn't possibly genuinely be that way. I guess.
Yeah.
Bit pop psychology, I know, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's what it's all about. Just trying to understand these characters. So yeah. I think that's kind of my take on those scenes. Have you got anything else to add?
Yeah, let's move on to the next bit. So our fourth section, in a scheme to recover the $1,250 Carver lost on the destroyed wireless mic, Herc gets his cousin Bernard to pose for photos as their fake informant, Fuzzy Dunlop. And the fake name is based on what Herc and Carver named the tennis ball that held the microphone in. So Bernard insists on 10% of the CI payments. Carver hands the paperwork to Daniels, who balks at the name and high price of $150, but signs it anyway. and Herc and Carver grin over the success of their scheme.
Yeah. So, yeah, we see Fuzzy Dunlop come along, and in this case, he does have a face, and he's a cousin of Herc, right? Is that right? Bernard, they seem to call him.
Yeah, he must be cousins, because he says that you're doing it because my mum and your mum are sisters.
That's it. There we go. So, a bit of family loyalty coming into it, and he certainly seems to have a few more brain cells than his cousin.
Yeah.
I kind of like how he constantly questions Herc and Carver's shady cover-up, and he negotiates his way into the plan with the 10%. So, quite an enterprising chap, really. He's not just your average numbskull. And he reminds Herc that bringing in the case is his job, and all the extra attention and prestige he seeks is unearned completely. So I thought it was quite a humbling and mature message from this little guy, actually, overall. I wasn't expecting it.
Yeah, we learn a lot about Bernard in this very small scene, and I don't think we ever see him again.
No.
Except in that photo.
Yep, I'd quite happily listen to him wax lyrical about Herc and Carver's shortcomings for another few minutes.
Does give him a bit of a telling to, doesn't he?
Mm.
There's a couple of moments in this scenes like that in this episode, I think. Moments where characters are like
Schooled.
being brought down. Yeah, being
Yeah.
schooled, being brought down a peg or two. Like definitely happens to Frank later on.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that. Yeah. So the next little section in the Spock detail, Perlman meets with Greggs and Bunk to discuss how to proceed with the investigation of the vice aspect of the smuggling. They tell her that they have found that the same company owns the warehouse and the apartments. They speculate that the apartments are being used as a cat house. They decide they need someone to go undercover to infiltrate the apartment as a John. No one seems like a good fit for the job until McNulty shows up for duty for the first time, and much to the amusement of the rest of the detail, becomes the obvious choice. Greggs and McNulty set up surveillance of the parking garage at the apartment building, and they pull over one of the Johns and get him to explain how to contact the madam. They also note the girls are being driven in via a panel truck. This is our little section with Mr. Robert Johnson.
Great section as well, yeah. I thought that so hilarious, that scene where McNulty stumbles in just at the right moment as they're after their kind of brothel undercover John. And it's kind of what his episode opener set up almost. It's kind of paying that off. And McNulty's broken life really working to his advantage. He's got nothing to lose really, unlike everyone else.
Yeah, it's interesting how it really somehow, despite the situation, it's like you say, come to his advantage, and he speaks very much from experience when he approaches his mission. So it's sort of tragic comedy, I suppose.
Yeah, and it also leads to a very nice, natural, convincing use of his catchphrase as he comes in.
Yeah, it's probably the most genuine sounding moment, because I just kind of tut or shake my head a little bit when he says it.
Yeah.
Just like, it's not a particularly good catchphrase at all.
No, it totally works here.
But yeah, it does work here.
Feels like they wrote this scene, they wrote this line for this scene almost. So, but yeah, as far as the scope of the John goes, that was pretty cool. Prepping ourselves for McNulty's excellent adventure next episode, which I'm very excited about, where McNulty actually goes properly undercover and takes things a bit far, as you may well kind of imagine McNulty doing. And a real kind of fine return to form, as you were hinting at, that McNulty's kind of life experience really plays into his favour here, as he kind of understands exactly what the John's thinking, the kind of psychology of being a John, and how to kind of behave around your significant other people in your life whilst being a John. So it's kind of cool to see that perspective on it.
Yeah, and it takes Greggs a moment to kind of realise as well, when he starts kind of talking about what the guy's doing and he's psyching himself up. Greggs kind of like listens intently, and then you can kind of see that she kind of looks at him with like, how exactly do you know all of this? You know? Even though she probably knows exactly what's going on.
Yeah, so she's getting schooled again there. And it was kind of some nice season 1 nostalgia to see Kima and McNulty on the job together. And they certainly do have some sort of chemistry as a double act, unlike Prez and Kima, who just kind of seem to sit there rigidly. So I thought it was nice to see those two back in the car again.
Our final section with the detail is with Beatty, Prez, and Freeman as they notice another potential container theft from the docks. A Transco lines ship with Horseface working as a checker. This time the surveillance work runs in combination with the wiretaps, and the detail tracks the container to the warehouse. When Frank Sobotka sends out a second container, which is a clean decoy, McNulty rushes to tail it. Beatty arranges to slow down the rig with a fictitious traffic stop until McNulty can get into position. So we have another sort of tracking of a truck here.
Yeah, another really exciting scene, actually. Just as good as the first one. And I really do like Frank Sobotka's idea. It really creates this kind of cat and mouse situation. This kind of war of chess, almost, between the two sides, as they both try and outsmart each other. And both catch up with each other very quickly. There's kind of moments where one person's a step behind the other, and then they kind of realise what's going on, and then that the detail eventually work out that the can is clean and the rest of it, and the Greeks work out that their phones are being tapped thanks to Sobotka's caution. So it really is a tough competition at this point. Yeah,
so it's there's another kind of more reasonably timed setup here as well. There's a bit more. I feel like might be a bit more time for them to actually trace this can that goes missing. The first one, I mean. And there's that moment, I think, when he steps out onto the courtyard at the docks, and is it the same bit where Greg's is like she's operating as a sort of gas and electric?
That's right, yeah.
Person, and it's interesting. She obviously scopes the can, and she can kind of see the numbers and whatever on the side. But whilst we assume that she's doing that, Frank is obviously walking out onto the courtyard, and if she remembers that photo that's on the detail office, she may or may not realise that she's got eyes on the very centre of their detail. It's literally just the other side of the courtyard from her.
Yeah.
And presumably she misses it while she's scoping the actual container itself. So it's interesting how close those characters come.
Yeah, definitely. It's really cool to see that, and to see Sobotka's insecurities really rise up as he really suspects Greg's of being something quite sinister, and he's absolutely right in thinking that. So yeah, it's cool. It was a bit weird seeing Prez feeling like he sort of felt like a bit of an exposition machine this episode. Kind of talking about, now we've got the wire up, so we'll hear what goes on in the warehouse, and damn, I wish we had the office phone tapped when someone makes a call to the office. It's just kind of they're not completely unnecessary, but they just sort of felt like a strange kind of signposting to the audience from Prez this episode. So
yeah, Prez and Beatty do kind of feel like the naive characters. They're kind of there to ask the questions in a way. So yeah, certainly in this episode, Prez didn't really do a whole much. It's a step down from his brilliant cringing faces.
Yeah.
From earlier.
McNulty's stolen his thunder, really, unfortunately. Sorry, Prez.
But yes, so we were getting a little bit more into the dock business there, and that's our next major section. So should we move on?
Yeah. It's tricky to talk about that kind of docks surveillance, isn't it? Because it kind of completely intertwines both strands, so we don't really know where to talk about it. But we'll wait for the dock business, I guess, to
so the dock business is going to be the next bit. So let's look at that in more detail.
Yeah.
So the stevedores continue to mock Ziggy, egging him on to retaliate against Maui's taunting. When he eventually does, his sucker punch is pathetic, and Maui easily beats him. Pins him down and has a forklift bring them to the top of a 2-story container. Maui throws him on the top and warns the laughing stevedores not to rescue Ziggy from his predicament, and Ziggy curses the other stevedores, claiming that they gave him bad advice. Which I'm sure we can both agree is not much of a comeback. It's kind of strange that he stood there just, you gave me bad advice. It's like, it's a very strange thing to shout in response.
Well, I think, as clever as the guy is, he just couldn't think of anything worse as an insult at that point, which
he
is
was
what makes it
so defeated that he kind of just lost all his critical faculties.
That's what makes it hilarious, yeah. Well, I do feel for the guy. Like, everybody is shitting on Ziggy. Like, it's kind of gotten to crisis point almost with, all the trusted members of his, stevedores ring around him and just completely egging him on to do these ridiculous things. And, Horseface and, was it Lala, just completely, manipulating him in the funniest but most evil way possible, really.
Yeah, it's, I don't know. Do you think Ziggy maybe seems a little bit too easily convinced? I mean, he's not an idiot. I mean, surely he can see that Maui is like way bigger than him. He doesn't have a clue how to fight. He's not demonstrated any kind of a approach towards fighting in the past. In fact, it's been demonstrated that he's clearly quite afraid to do it. And then suddenly he's convinced to attack this guy who's clearly like the most sort of fearsome of all the people that we've seen across the docks. Maui is like this kind of big built guy who's quite intimidating. And suddenly Ziggy is encouraged to run up behind him and punch him just kind of in the side of his back or something. It's like, I don't know. It's a bit of a strange moment.
Yeah, it's a stupid maneuver. I guess you can it kind of feeds into. You get the sense here that Ziggy is kind of running out of options in terms of, offering something to the world, and the only thing he can offer is to kind of play on people's expectations of him. So he almost kind of parodies himself, and particularly when he buys that duck later on, it's kind of like he's just playing for the joke, so that rather than being laughed at, he can laugh with people at himself almost. It's kind of this weird. It's just completely kind of. It's kind of the next step of defeat for him almost, and perhaps that's kind of what he's doing there. He's just doing what people expect of him, so that he can be laughed at and laugh with them almost. Exactly.
Yeah, he kind of comes to realise that he'd be better off trying to go. If you can't beat them, join them. Basically.
Yeah.
He's got to go with the flow on that one, and if people are going to see him as that comical figure, then if he plays up to it, he may endear himself to them. That's kind of his new approach.
Exactly, that's the only way he'll become accepted, and it's, it's the only utility he can offer to his stevedores now. He's got no other purpose, particularly with Nick kind of really taking off on the drug game. It must make him feel all the more inadequate.
Right, so moving on. When Horseface reports the fight to Frank Zabotka, Frank is more worried about their month-end finances than his son's latest screw-up. He goes to pay his 90-day overdue cell phone bill, but learns that his account has been flagged to not be cut off. A possible clue that law enforcement is monitoring their activity. Horseface dismisses this as paranoia. Later, Zabotka spots Greggs on the docks when she is posing as an engineer to watch the smuggling operation. His suspicions are raised enough to ask after Beatty Russell, and he learns that she lied when she told him she was transferring to Fairfield. The other Port Authority officers tell him she is detailed to the Baltimore City Police. He decides to send out a clean container to test the waters, as we mentioned earlier, and Zabotka notices the container being stopped and goes to call the Greek, but realises his cell phone is unsafe. He uses the untapped office phone to set up a meeting with the Greek. So this is basically all around Frank's growing paranoia, and I think we mentioned before how he was becoming quite narrow-minded and very much focused on, I don't know, this sort of mission that he's got, whatever exactly that it is, but it comes into, it plays into his hand here. It's his focus and his obsession with it actually allows him to spot these details, and he's right. He's right to be paranoid in this situation.
I think Horseface is perhaps sitting there and telling him that, look, you are overthinking this, and in some cases he might be right, but as you say, he's right at every turn. Like his paranoia is completely justified, and it really makes him come across as a smart, very kind of discerning man. So it's good to see. And it's nice that he really does think about that phone being flagged. I can imagine a lot of people just kind of dismissing it as some sort of phone company hitch, but it really is Frank understanding that bureaucracy that the police company has put a tap on the phone. Therefore, the phone must be flagged, and we have to stop caring about how much Frank pays us and how much Frank talks to criminals. So Frank totally saw that coming, which was really nice.
Yeah, he's managed to piece everything together very clearly.
Yeah.
And he's got a good memory as well.
Yeah, definitely. We see that bureaucracy come back again when kind of a different branch of the police inadvertently tips off BD's secret to Frank, as you said in the recap. And Frank again completely jumps on it. So it just shows us kind of the importance of that cross communication and how these small confusions have suddenly put the investigation on the line with Frank, finally acting on these suspicions and disappearing the containers and stuff like that. And, yeah.
So yeah, he's properly spooked here, but it does him well.
Yeah. And we also learn that Horseface is impartial to fake tits.
Yes, we do get that scene as well, yeah. I like the fact that he starts it off by saying, "Can I ask you something important?" Which is nice.
Definitely. We see why Frank really is a deserved leader of the tribe.
Yeah. Well, he kind of finally gets his meeting with the Greek as well. But for now, let's move on to the bit with him and his brother Louis.
Yeah.
So Frank meets with his brother and offers him a position with the Port Advisory Board, a position that was clearly made available to Louis after Frank made a generous contribution. Louis refuses the offer, saying it's not for him. He insists that everything he has come straight. Frank tries to claim the only difference between them is that he chose the right union, but Louis disagrees. Frank is infuriated that Louis has a sense of moral superiority over his choices. And like we mentioned before, I think Frank does get a bit of a schooling here. He's brought down a peg or two, and I think it's particularly telling, and I think we've mentioned this before, that Frank is quite willing to pull some strings to get his brother a job, but not his own son.
Yeah.
And although we obviously we do see Ziggy working in this episode, he's kind of going that extra mile for someone like Louis, and like I say, we barely ever see him interact with Ziggy.
Yeah, it's definitely very strange.
Even though he acknowledges his failures to some extent when he has that conversation when they're at the wharf. He kind of acknowledges the fact that he hasn't quite done the duty that he should have done as a father. Perhaps sort of overlooked his skill, especially technologically speaking.
Yeah. You certainly don't, but then again, you don't need to look far. You don't need to see Ziggy much, just to really see both sides of the argument. I mean, yes, the fatherly neglect is bad, but we sense it's perhaps because he feels Ziggy is untrustworthy beyond repair. I mean, what could you really trust Ziggy with at this point? He really feels like he's descended down into this completely kind of useless pit almost. So you can kind of see that both sides of the argument there. It's a tricky situation for Frank.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I guess he's been very hesitant, and to some extent, like you say, that's really worked out quite well because it's avoided avoided quite a few headaches for him. But Louis here, he insists that his money comes straight, and I think Frank maybe has a little think about exactly what it is that he's doing to get hold of all this money and what he's doing it for, and exactly why he's offering a position like that to his brother. Like he doesn't seem to know him well enough to know that wouldn't be something that would be for him, as he says.
Yeah,
and a sense that Frank is drifting away from those around him in that isolated sense.
Yeah,
that I think we touched on in the last episode.
Definitely. I think Frank does make mention of it. He really wants to force the Sobotka name down the Union, and like obviously Louis has that name, and perhaps that's why he's really wanting more representation from the Sobotkas on the kind of Union board.
There's a legacy sort of
yeah.
element to this, isn't there?
And it's kind of, I think it's come up more strongly with following this altercation with Ott that's brewing, that he really wants that Sobotka name to fly high and to be noticed by the voters of the Union, really.
Yeah, fighting for a bit of power there, that's for sure.
Yep. I guess it's if you think about Louis in the show, I mean, there's not a lot of him, but he really does have a bit of a tough time. He's clearly a bit of an embittered man, disillusioned with the future of the Union and the docks, and the only other thing that he gets up to in the show really is finding out about the true extent of his brother's criminal operations, and also his son Nick, the fact that he's a heroin dealer, and they find both drugs and drug money in his basement, which certainly can't be a nice thing to find out. So it's kind of not the best of arcs for this character Louis here throughout the show.
Yeah, that's true. So, anything else you want to say about that bit, or shall we move on?
Yeah, let's move on.
So the next bit we have is with Ziggy. So Ziggy buys a duck from a neighbourhood man who keeps birds. He meets with his cousin Nick and admires his new car. And Nick asks him about his fight with Maui and can't hide his amusement. Ziggy takes the duck to Dolores' bar and entertains the other stevedores with duck jokes and the bird's propensity to drink whiskey and beer on top of the bar.
Absolutely.
So this really quite incredible scene where we are led to believe that a duck is quite happy to drink alcohol. Which I can't help but feel that a duck wouldn't do that. They'd probably take one taste and hate it. But I don't know. I wouldn't like to find out. I don't think I'd like to test that out. As we know, it doesn't have a particularly positive effect on the poor duck.
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous, and I was intrigued by the bird coop that Marlowe goes to even Ziggy goes to, because we also see Marlowe is in love with a bird coop. I don't think it's the same one, but it's nice to see there's kind of a bit of synergy there. We always look for our parallels.
There's coop culture in Baltimore.
Yeah, true that. And they also, there's kind of the mention of the clipped wings aspect to purchasing the duck, isn't there? Which kind of makes it, it kind of adds a symbolic layer to it, but I guess the real reason he's buying it is because he's trying to extend the joke that he's become. And this seems like a particularly loud and proud way to do it. Yeah,
it's interesting that this scene is the one that gives us our epigraph and provides, quite a general idea for the episode and the show as a whole, because it's it's a fairly unassuming scene. It's not a particularly memorable scene, but Ziggy has this moment about why don't they just fly away, and it appeals to quite a lot of characters in the show, and the fact that they are kind of stuck in these institutions, their wings are clipped, and Ziggy, in relation to this, kind of realises his limitations, I suppose.
Yeah.
And he's now got to work within them, and he's got to excel at what he's been made by other people. He's had his wings clipped by the other stevedores in that sense, so he's going to take advantage of it. Yep,
and that's certainly a lesson that his father hasn't learned. His father's convinced that his wings are as clipped as you make them, I guess. So it's a more optimistic way of looking at it.
I am the clips. Oh, sorry, wrong show.
Yeah, so it's cool to see that. I quite like that as a epigraph. We've kind of already discussed it, I guess. We're kind of jumping ahead, but I did enjoy that one. It was nice for Ziggy to have his moment.
And moving on to our next section, next strand within the dock business. So at the warehouse, Glikas and Sergei unload the clean container, and angrily phone Vondas at the cafe. The police trace the call and recognise it as the same number that Frank dialed. And Vondas instructs Sergei to dump the container, and McNulty follows it far enough to make sure, but is then recalled by Daniels. So there's just our little bit where they are unloading these Bobby dolls.
Yeah.
I'm
it's
assuming that is it Mattel that
Yeah.
makes Barbie dolls?
odd. Quite possibly.
They probably didn't want the real thing to be associated with the show when it's supposed to be like drugs and chemicals and things like that.
Yeah, that's very true. Actually, it's weird because this is the first time I've noticed it's Bobby. I always assumed it was Barbie. They very cleverly designed that marketing so that you can barely tell unless you look closely that it's not actually Barbie. So that's a good spot.
And they kind of get their boss man here, the detail. Obviously, they're listening in and tracing this call, and they understand that the person they're listening to now is someone who's very much in charge. And we see that the Greeks, though they don't have much flash and they seem extremely cautious, and they're obviously very knowledgeable and they've been doing it for a very long time, they are also complacent enough not to be worried about the police tapping their phones. And they're quite openly using their mobiles and everything to make these giveaway conversations, and it's the detail that allows them to snap them in the recording here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very true.
They're not flawless by any means when it comes to their business.
Yeah, that's a good point. If we go back to Barksdale, which is a very different organisation, obviously, the majority of their security revolved around avoiding phone usage for that very reason, because they had that caution, and the caution was warranted because drugs are very high on the criminal agenda. And it's nice to see how they keep adapting to find new ways to avoid using tappable phones. So yeah, it's a very good point that there are limitations on both sides of the criminal spectrum.
So continuing on with the Greeks, our next section has Frank drinking with Nick and discussing their problems with the investigation. He asks Nick to accompany him to the meeting. So the Greek is impressed by Frank's caution, suggesting they only move clean containers for a while. And Nick and Frank insist that they must still be paid in full for moving the containers, and the Greek agrees to their terms because he expects them to continue to do good business in the future. And I think it says something about the Greeks' organisation that they have the kind of money to be able to just send completely clean containers for quite some time. Whereas, as we see in contrast with the Barksdale organisation, they have a short period of bad business and their poor product, and it all seems to start going downhill very quickly. Clearly, the Greeks don't seem to anticipate that. They seem to think that everything will be fine. Yeah. So we kind of see a big difference in income there.
Yeah, that's what economies of scale does for you. It allows you to take some hits and not have to worry about it. So yeah, it's a very good point again. We see the difference between those two operations, the kind of street scale operation and the real global scale. It was weird to see the Greek talk to Frank about the materialistic aspect of money, which is something that we don't see the Greek or Vondas seem to buy into at all. The idea that you have to live with flash if you have money, and he kind of dangles it in front of him as another kind of alluring capitalist gesture to kind of tempt him into his offer to stay with them, and it seems to work. And Frank demands that he's paid for the clean cans as well, because as Nick quite rightly points out, they still have to go through the same motions to delete those cans off the system. And it's nice that the Greek caves to that, and he lets the money do the talking again. That's kind of always his protocol. Let the money talk, and if you've got enough of it, you can always get what you want if you subscribe to that idea.
Yeah, I don't think this is a particularly major victory or anything for Frank here, because, like you say, they let the money do the talking, and they can clearly afford to have these clean cans. So I'm sure that continuing to pay Frank, even though they're moving clean containers, is not going to be. It's not about the money. No. It's really just more about establishing a sense of authority, and he caves in to kind of seem like he's making a generous offer or anything, but it's very much the Greeks that have got their claws into the Sobotkas. Yeah, they've got their taste of money, and they want to keep them on as working partners. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah,
and it's interesting that if we sort of imagine that Frank goes on to have great success with his political dealings and, you know, gets everything that he wants in order to ensure more ships or larger ships coming in, irrespective of what, you know, what actually happens, he would indirectly actually be aiding the Greeks' business.
Yeah, that's very true.
So if he went on to do that, it would kind of be making them even bigger. And they kind of established this giant sort of criminal network from the docks of Baltimore.
And I guess the key element there that Frank perhaps hasn't thought about is how do you get out of this? You still get the sense that Frank likes to think he's in control of this. He's the one who's having to accept these offers of moving the cans, but that money really is doing a lot more talking than Frank perhaps realises, and it's almost like he's trapped there. And just because they, as you say, get more ships in, doesn't mean that things are going to end for him and he can go back to being a noble longshoreman. You know, he's kind of trapped in that world now. If he doesn't, you know, as he'll soon come to realise.
It's interesting that for all Frank's ambition, it's not entirely clear what his goal is.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously he wants a certain level of prosperity down the docks and for the people working there, and he wants them to have good working hours, and we kind of understand that he has certain goals there. But like you say, there isn't really a sense of end game because he can't achieve this kind of dream through all of these means whilst also dealing with the criminal underworld, and something's got to give eventually.
Yeah, definitely.
And it does, and it's him. You know.
It's not long now as well. Yeah, it's the tragedy is coming.
Yeah, it's very sad. But yeah, that is that's kind of the strands for our dock business. Anything else you want to say about that section?
I guess there's just the bit where Nick and Ziggy chat about the drug dealing, right? In Nick's new kind of 4x4.
Yes, that was earlier. We did cover that earlier, but yeah.
Yeah.
As I mentioned that he meets with Nick and admires his new car.
Oh yeah, of course.
And then Nick asks him about the fight with Maui.
Yeah. Oh, true that. Yeah. So I just thought it was interesting just to see kind of how Nick seems to have transitioned into this drug dealer very, very quickly, and things are very suddenly looking very comfortable for this guy. And Ziggy really is getting a good deal here, like very generous helpings of the takings. I don't know why he deserves that. I guess all of this money is ultimately coming from Ziggy and Nick's chemical smuggling, right? I assume, which then gets them paid in heroin, which then gets them paid in wholesale return. So that's kind of cool to see. And
yeah, that's true. Nick seems a lot more cocky in this episode, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He's kind of gone from a certain, you know, somewhat self-aggrandizing, I suppose, possibly, but he certainly kind of got that wisdom that he imparts on Frog. Seems quite proud of himself there, and now with all of his successes with the money, and he's got his new car, and he seems a lot more cocksure.
Definitely.
And that kind of attitude is very often the downfall of a lot of characters in The Wire.
Yeah. Yeah, it's. I don't think too much of it comes here. He does come back down to earth by the end of the season, I think, really. But yeah, it's interesting to see how quickly that's happened, and I really like the look on Nick's face, like he's about to be sick when Ziggy starts stupidly discarding the money again.
Yes,
like it's like absolute fuming rage, and it's an unbelievable gesture from Ziggy again, like so inappropriate. But you know, it's just kind of. It's just Ziggy's lack of being taken seriously, just burning inside of him.
Yeah, I guess his option is to just do what he's told and take his money and not do anything for it. And he's got his money, but he doesn't have anyone's respect.
He doesn't have that recognition, that kind of Walter White yearning for respect for what he's done, sort of thing.
It ceases to be about the money. It ceases to be about the work or anything like that. It's just
the ego.
I want to be someone special.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's kind of cool. But by making all that hoo-ha, he just he's causing himself to become less and less serious, like taken less and less seriously. It's just a spiral of decline for him. So,
yeah, it just becomes a bit of a caricature.
Yeah.
Certainly in the eyes of the other stevedores, anyway.
And yeah, definitely. And I guess the last thing to say about the Doc's strand is that Frank's plan to ditch that can actually, it perhaps gives the detail their biggest ever lead, because it leads to them finding Spiros' number when Sergei frantically calls up Spiros asking why there's Barbies in the can. which I thought was a kind of a nice extension of the idea that all the pieces matter again. So.
Now, there is one section here, before we move on to the Barksdale organisation, there is one section here that kind of covers the dock business, the detail, and McNulty. So it's a bit of an awkward one, this, so I'm just going to do this bit now.
Okay.
So the police dismiss the non-contraband container as a mistake, but Freeman is nevertheless pleased to have obtained the number of Vondas' phone. McNulty and Beatty then go for a drink and discuss their past relationships. McNulty drives her because her car is in need of repair, and while at the bar, McNulty calls the number for the madam and sets up an appointment. McNulty has another drink at Beatty's home, but leaves quickly when he sees a picture of her children, realising nothing good could come out of a sexual encounter with her.
There's a
So
lot of
McNulty
tension.
actually makes a very smart decision after an episode of many misdeeds and allusions to just how dark his life can get when he doesn't have that sense of direction. And having now come back on the case and got a little bit more stability, I suppose, he ends up with Beatty, and although, as we know, they do end up being an item, he makes a smart decision here and doesn't just go opportunistic and take sex just because he can.
Yeah. A very mature development for the guy.
And Beatty seems kind of equal parts disappointed but pleased as well.
Yeah. It's cool to kind of see her face drop, but also rise. As you say, it's kind of perfectly kind of mixed emotions. Yeah. That it's probably for the best that they don't. Even if in the short term kind of moment she was really kind of getting excited about it, you imagine. So, yeah, it was cool to see that, and I liked that everything around the house kind of screamed to Jimmy to stop and go away, and particularly that cookie jar kind of really nailed it. Like, step away.
Yeah, he couldn't have got more signs.
Yeah, that
I mean,
water
kind of
pistol.
does a little bit of detective work as he's kind of walking around, doesn't he? And
Yeah.
he's kind of poking at things, and like you say, the cookie jar itself literally tells him to step away.
Yeah.
And he kind of
Absolutely.
ends up on the pictures of those kids, and then he knows that it's not a good idea to stick around.
Nope. And that he really isn't thinking about himself there. He really is thinking about Beatty's livelihood, and that's a really nice development to see from McNulty.
It's also interesting that when they're in the bar and he calls the madam, she says, "What kind of girl are you looking for?" And we see kind of McNulty looking across the bar at Beatty.
That is very true.
It's obviously a dead giveaway to the fact that, like I say, they do end up together, and in that sense, Beatty is what he's looking for. He is looking to kind of settle down and have someone there that can kind of keep him right, I suppose, like we were talking about before, and how Bunk says that he needs to be kind of sent to this position of normality, even if he is still a little bit of a fuck up.
Yeah.
But McNulty himself is smart enough and knows himself well enough to make the right decision, nonetheless.
Yeah,
He's just holding it off for now.
Yeah, it's going to be a long brewing period before that relationship kicks off. But as we've mentioned, it's great that The Wire really signposts these things early and proves that it has a very long-term vision. It was nice to see, I think, Freeman as well. There was a long time they dwelled on Freeman's face as he analysed McNulty and Beatty's seemingly casual after-work drinks as to what was really going on there. It was nice to see him, really think things through deeply. So that was kind of cool. His suspicions were piqued.
So our last major bit here, and I think I might just do this all in one, is our bits with the Barksdale organisation.
Yeah.
So Bodie and Poot walk through their territory, bemoaning the lack of trade because of their weak product. Pudding has a similar story from the towers. Later, they notice an independent crew dealing on their territory with far more success than they have been getting. Bodie and Poot organise a crew to strike back against the dealers on their territory, and they make an early start and beat them to their corner, When the other crew arrive, they successfully drive them away, but expect retaliation. So there's a lot of small bits to do with Bodhi and Poot and kind of the poor situation with the Barksdale organisation. There's no stringer or anything like that here. This is just purely with the lieutenants and on the street.
Yeah, it's really left for Bodhi to carry this, isn't it?
Yeah, and he kind of has a tough time with it here, and obviously that the product is having a serious impact. And he ends up having to let those two guys go, and they end up seeing them later on working for the other crew. And, getting a little bit of business sense here on the street, aren't they?
Yep. I thought it was nice to see the pit as well. I forgot that we see the pit beyond season 1, and it really is looking bedraggled and overgrown, and with the flagging business. And it was nice to see a kind of dwelling on that famous pit sofa, which has now become black, or has at least been replaced by a black sofa, and is completely broken. So there's really a nice suggestion there of the loss of D'Angelo and Wallace, I thought, which was quite nice. Not necessarily just the business.
It's interesting as well that we see, especially Bodhi, walking through a lot of these situations, and they're talking about how bad it is. And he says, like, oh, shit is fucked up. He's talking about how kind of messed up the whole situation is. And yet all around him we can see the towers kind of returning to what we might consider normality. And the fact that you've got sort of kids coming about and people pushing trolleys, it looks a lot more kind of pedestrian in a sense. It looks less like somewhere where gangs hang out and sell drugs, and more like just a sort of street civilian area,
Yeah, that's very true, actually. You see people really going about their daily lives. It's almost like now that the drugs have gone from this area, we can bring it back to normality and establish some safety, because it's only the drugs. This is actually one of my favourite aspects of this whole episode,
is that they very subtly hint at this kind of improvement that happens to the local area once the drugs move away. It kind of doesn't feel the need for anyone to point it out. In fact, I guess they kind of do the opposite, because like I say, with Bodhi saying shit is fucked up as if everything is all wrong, when in fact everything's returning to normality. Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. Yeah, which I think is fantastic. It's very, very nicely done. It really sets up that that kind of Amsterdam argument. It's almost kind of a prologue to it, almost, isn't it? It's really, really nice. Yeah, so we get a nice little reminder of the mentality of the street as well. And when Bodhi says that that sort of rival crew come along because they've got there early, but they've brought weapons and to stave them off. And Bodhi says to Poot, the way we punked them, they've got to, when he asks if they're going to come back. You kind of see the mindset of the street there, like. That's, in a way, it intimidates them to go away, but at the same time, if they want to stay, if they want to sort of keep face, as it were, save face, they want to. They're going to have to come back. Definitely, yeah. We're really seeing that this poor quality product has yanked the product in the first place, and now their territory, and you can kind of hear Prop Joe's voice over the top saying, product always trumps territory, and he's bang on right. It's working right here. It's basic economics, and that offer that Prop Joe's laid out the stringer is an absolute no-brainer at this point. Like it needs to happen, otherwise you're going to lose everything. There won't be a Barksdale organisation at this rate. Yeah, definitely. And I really like seeing Bodhi taking it upon himself to mass the troops. Really indicates kind of his growth and his natural arc to rise and manage that smart-ass pawn. Yeah, I was just about to say. Really grafting. Pawn. Yeah, like grafting his way out of the pawn layer of the chessboard, at least attempting to. So it's really nice to see that development and that determination. So yeah, that's that section there, and that pretty much covers everything, I think. Unless there's anything else you want to add from the recap. It was pretty cool that they kind of end the Barksdale strand on a nice cliffhanger. It's very unusual of the Wire to go for the cliffhanger, but we've really got this kind of big feud. Hasn't really taken place yet, but it's kind of been set up. So we're looking forward to the resolution next week. I think there's only a couple of things we missed.
We missed Bunk in his lacrosse gear, which I absolutely adore. Probably one of my favourite Bunk scenes in the whole show, where it's what even happened.
Well, he comes in and he kind of has, instead of having his, what is it? It's the, I'm trying to remember how Landsman describes it. I wish he had been there to kind of give him a description of his lacrosse outfit. I'm sure that would have been good.
Definitely, yeah. I thought that the personal highlight was actually Daniel's. One of the funniest lines in The Wire. I thought you were born in pinstripes, and it's so funny that it comes from Daniels, because Daniels is just such a kind of blunt, deadpan, kind of serious
never
guy.
tells jokes.
And like it just this absolute lightning wit just pops out of his mouth. It's like, oh yes, like, it's brilliant. So he has to step in for Landsman on this occasion. But I thought it was great that Bunk just came in those sweats. It's just hilarious. And just because he hasn't got to take a day in the office, he decides to really kind of play with the rules. And finally, I think Claude, who we won't see again, probably worth mentioning, Claude Diggins, McNulty's boat partner.
Yeah, this is his final appearance, I think.
Final appearance. The thing I really liked about it was that I've never noticed it before, but it really bookends his time on the show, because I think Claude Diggins' first line at the start, the very first scene of the season actually, is he's chatting about the weather to McNulty, and saying, don't worry, soon it will be spring. And his final words are saying, the weather's now turned, you're on to new things, McNulty, which I thought was really kind of nice and fitting. To show that McNulty's been through his boredom phase and now he's on to his new one, and Claude's been there for him on the ride, so yeah, that's pretty cool.
One thing I might like to add to that, just a silly little question I suppose, but does the Marine unit consist only of those two?
It looks
because
like
we never
it,
see anybody else, and they have that office that appears to accommodate a handful of people. But we only ever see the two of them. Is it just really them on one boat for the whole of the river?
Yeah, it certainly looks like it, isn't it? I guess I'm not sure it would. I really
just
don't
normally,
feel like I'm qualified to comment on this.
Normally when we see these institutions, they have these micro institutions. So we have so obviously we have the police, and within that we have those at the top tier. We have the brass, we have the homicide, we have the detail. They're all kind of broken up into these mini institutions. So we're introduced to the Marine unit, but it just seems to consist of the two of them, which is quite unusual, especially when we spend quite a few times on the boat and with Claude and Jimmy. And so, I don't know, I just wondered if there were actually ever meant to be any more people involved in that part of the police.
Yeah, maybe not. I mean, years of movies and video games has perhaps trained me to think that the Marine units of city police are large, because whenever you run into the river in, say GTA or whatever, there's this sea of police boats descends on you. But perhaps, really,
are you seriously using Grand Theft Auto as a reference for realism? Not only in for real life, but also in relation to The Wire, of all things.
I'm really clasping for frames of reference here.
Are you expecting one of them to find a rocket launcher at the top of a tower one day? And to start getting a special bonus where they have to destroy 5 packages in 5 minutes.
I think
so. And then $10,000 appears in their pocket somehow.
Yeah, I'm thinking so. But if I'm trying to think in real life terms, I'm trying to work out what crimes really go on the water. We certainly saw a floater or two, but they're kind of beyond the ordinary. So. Maybe this one boat is all Baltimore needs, and not
I don't know,
6 stars worth of.
I'd be surprised if it was just the one boat. Maybe if any native Baltimoreans want to clear that up, if they know exactly how many police, you can spend a night out on the docks, spend a night and day out, and just count the number of unique ships. I'm sure that won't be boring or pointless at all.
Please let us know.
Yeah, please let us know.
So we can refer to something other than Grand Theft Auto as a. It's a convincing frame of reference. Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, that kind of does it for the recap, I think.
Yeah, sure. Should we move on to our 4 sections at the end?
You really used to raise pigeons with my peapop?
We all did back then. I give one to a seaman on a Dutch tanker one time. He set her loose in the middle of the ocean. Damn if she didn't find her way back to Hull Street. Which, by the way, is more than I can say about your grandfather when he was in the bag.
How come they don't fly away?
His wings are clipped.
Let's start with favourite scenes this time, I think. Any scenes that stood out in particular for you?
I think the surveillance of the John with Kima and Greg's was very good and very telling of McNulty's character. I think McNulty's bender as an opening deserves a very certainly a mention and recognition for kind of how crazy it is, and it really does work as a half-remembered night out scene. And then everything to do with the can surveillance, just like last week, it was very gripping and really showed these two sides at odds with one another. And I particularly enjoyed the moment where Frank made that on-the-spot decision to release a clean can. I was like, yes, like the action's really hitting heights here. So those would be my favourites.
Yeah, some good choices there for sure. In addition, I think I would say, as I mentioned before, I do like the scenes with Bodhi and where he considers everything to be all messed up when it's actually turning to normality, and it's kind of suggested through the imagery of people sort of congregating and everything becoming a bit more civil and looking less like gang territory. I just think those scenes, just the message that they're conveying, is being really beautifully done. Likewise, I really like the scene with the John as well, and Frank Zabonka's decisiveness and this idea that his paranoia is justified. And like you say, when the action ramps up there, it's all very exciting. I'm tempted to throw in, this may seem a bit unusual, I am tempted to throw in the scene with the duck drinking as a favourite, because it is quite a memorable scene for me in Season 2. It's just so wacky, and the Wire doesn't often get the opportunity to be this kind of crazy, and it's kind of nice that it does here, because when you think of the more humorous sort of off-the-wall moments in The Wire, I mean, this has got to be up there. Having this duck sat on the bar that Ziggy's bought because he wants to play to the character that people have placed him in, and then he ends up getting this duck and it like drinks itself to death.
When you put it in those terms, it really does. It does sound really close. Although I think we're jumping ahead. It doesn't actually. Yeah. The duck doesn't finally keel over until next episode. So we're going to have to wait.
Yeah, that's true. It doesn't happen until next episode.
The duck has an arc, a 2-episode arc. If that's not ridiculous enough for you,
I wouldn't feel uncomfortable including that.
Yeah, I feel uncomfortable having omitted it, to be honest. So yeah, good choice.
So what about any characters you want to give a particular shout out here, under the guise of favourite characters?
Yeah, so, well, quite simply, I think McNulty, Bunk and Frank, for me, this episode really stood out. Yeah, I think I don't need to say much about those guys. McNulty really came back in a powerful way, and it's not often that you pick the main character as kind of your favourite. It almost feels like too obvious a choice, but this is a point where McNulty really deserves it after having to put up with a lot of negligence and irrelevance. And Bunk, that lacrosse scene I just found absolutely hilarious, and I think Bunk really deserves a few points here for really fighting for McNulty's survival as well. And then Frank just really returning to form after last week's kind of weird dip in his morality and kind of sense of importance of the docs and stuff. It was really nice to see him have those paranoid, not delusions, really clever, like intelligent deductions, and just to play the game with them, to release that clean can. It was a stroke of genius that unfortunately landed the detail with Spiros' number, but at the same time you can totally see why it was a good decision. So those would be my three.
It's interesting that one is a very clever snap decision, still doesn't end out all positive. Like, he tries to catch the detail out, or at least who he imagines might be following him, but they manage to sort of catch him out first, in a way.
Definitely.
Because they cotton on to what's happening.
Yeah. What about you, sir? Which would be your faves?
I think I'd like to give a shout out for Beedie in this episode. Largely because I don't think we've kind of mentioned her at great length before. But I think that Amy Ryan does a very good job of portraying her, especially in this episode in relation to her relationship with McNulty, and I think that all the foreshadowing is done very nicely. Her reaction when McNulty decides that it's time to leave after their drink, I think she does a really good job of nailing that mixed disappointment but relief at the same time. And also we kind of see her taking a shine to McNulty in a couple of other scenes. But just generally speaking, she has gone from being quite out of her depth to suddenly someone who is able to make clear decisions about what's going on in the detail. She seems a lot more at home now. And like I say, she's just not a character that I think we've placed a lot of emphasis on so far, but she's actually been pretty key to tying the whole thing towards the docks and making it feel like a new detail.
Yep, very good point.
So yeah, on top of pretty much everything else that you said, because like you say, I mean, Bunk is more excellence in this episode from the Bunk, and McNulty just comes back in a really big way, which is nice after having barely seen him all this time.
Absolutely. So yeah, I wouldn't be able to argue with any of that, sir. What do you feel about our title? Duck and Cover.
Duck and Cover.
The most subtle of titles.
Yeah, well, it's undoubtedly there's obviously the pet duck, and I guess there is a sense that's relating to Frank wanting to duck and cover.
The evasive manoeuvres. Yeah,
he kind of realizes that he's somewhat under threat. Someone's obviously trying to watch him, listen to his calls, whatever. And he's now going into a bit of a duck and cover mode.
Yep.
It's not quite the sort of water-based themes that we've got so far. It's a bit of a unusual name, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's quite nice. It's
in relation to season 2.
There's a very clear double meaning there, which you nailed just there, which I quite like about it. So yeah, I think a few of them are water-based, a few of them aren't. All of them are more interesting than season 1's titles, so I'm happy either way. I thought there was a nice kind of... The title might even have a third meaning, because it's kind of a precursor to the Barksdale's impending kind of street skirmish. The duck and cover is kind of a combat term as well, so I thought that it kind of set up that scenario quite nicely. As of course, if you remember, the next episode kicks off with a stray round hitting a boy in a window. So he certainly would have done with some duck and covering to avoid his death.
I suppose there's also the idea that after McNulty has failed to kind of get things back together with Elena, there is a sense that people around him should duck and cover as he kind of goes into this spiral of depression and self-destruction that is obviously very strongly shown at the start of the episode, and without the detail it would have carried on even further. And I think that's what Bunk and Freeman are thinking of. They're thinking that if we don't do something about this, then there's potentially a lot of fallout from it. We're going to have to see this guy destroy himself.
Yeah, very good point.
That comes to mind.
Yeah.
As for our epigraph, we kind of covered it quite a lot already, didn't we?
Yeah, it's just...
We kind of mentioned it before in the scene
kind
itself.
Of that clear metaphor that applies universally to everyone in The Wire. And I think perhaps by owning and bonding with the duck, the show is suggesting that Ziggy seems to understand this while people around him are oblivious to it. That's perhaps Ziggy's most noble quality, that he seems to resign himself to the fact that his wings are clipped and he is trapped. And that's kind of what we see him live out in this episode. So him buying the duck certainly works on a symbolic level as well as a practical one.
That's true, yeah. It's what do you think of it in terms of relation to other epigraphs? Do you think it's a particularly good one? Because as I mentioned before, it does tie into a lot of the other groups that we see in The Wire.
Yeah, I quite like how kind of blasé it is. It's just so matter of fact. As you say, it's kind of just in a really insignificant conversation, just as he goes to buy a duck. And I quite like how they've given that moment quite a bit of gravitas by making the epigraph come from it. And I think it's quite good. I really like the ones that can kind of apply to the show universally, and this one certainly does. So yeah, I'm quite a fan of this epigraph.
So yeah, that's pretty much it for Duck and Cover then. And up next,
it's Stray Rounds. Yeah,
Stray Rounds. That's the one.
It's a very, very good episode. Probably my second favourite after all prologue. So I'm looking forward to it.
yeah, just like you mentioned before, it does just keep getting better.
Yep. Yeah, so we'll see you guys next week for that.
Yeah, feel free to drop us any more emails that if you fancy, caughtonthewire@gmail.com, and we'll keep the website and blog and everything updated on the website, where you can also find all of the episodes. So that's caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. And we'll see you next week for episode 9, Stray Rounds. Thanks very much for joining us.
And now it's time for bed.
Yeah.
What you know about Baltimore? What you know about Baltimore? Baltimore. What you know about Baltimore? What you know about Baltimore?